I still remember the way the gravel crunched beneath my boots the day I moved into that quiet cul-de-sac in Mesa Ridge. A patch of desert suburbia with rows of terracotta roofs and beige stucco homes all lined up like obedient soldiers, each exactly 30 feet from the next. It looked peaceful, orderly, like the kind of place people go to forget the chaos of the world. I was 52, a retired environmental engineer who'd spent the last 2 decades working with municipalities on drought resilience programs. I came here looking for peace, solitude, a place to grow tomatoes in peace without a neighbor telling me how tall my fence should be. But I should have known better. The neighborhood was governed by an HOA Mesa Ridge Community Enhancement Board, they called it. The name alone was pretentious. But at the time, I wasn't worried. After all, I wasn't the type to pick fights. I had no dogs, no loud music, no unkempt yard. I was a quiet man, with a modest pension, a love for low-water gardening, and an obsession with capturing every drop of rain that fell on my roof. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my mornings unpacking boxes, and my afternoons mapping the contours of my backyard with a laser level calculating slopes and runoff rates. I knew this land. Dry, stubborn sun bleached. Every inch of it screamed scarcity, from the brittle lawn patches to the warnings about fire hazards posted on street corners. But to me, it was a blank slate, an engineer's dream. I was going to build a rainwater harvesting system that would have made my colleagues envious. Not just a few plastic barrels under the gutters either. A full subterranean cistern 3,000 gallons deep, filtered through gravel and UV light gravity fed into a drip irrigation layout. It would be clean and visible, sustainable. My retirement project. I hadn't even poured the concrete yet, when the first neighbor peeked over the cinder block wall and asked, "What are you building back there?" I turned around. She was about 60 with aggressively dyed auburn hair and sunglasses too large for her face. Her name, I would later learn, was Karen Lively, HOA president, self-declared property aesthetic guardian, and the source of more neighborhood strife than any natural disaster I'd ever studied. Rainwater system, I replied. Legal in Arizona provided it doesn't interfere with municipal supply. Which it doesn't. She wrinkled her nose. I hope you've submitted plans to the HOA. We have design standards here. I did, I said, pointing to a packet of papers on the patio table. Page 6 of the CC1Rs specifically allows non-visible systems, and mine's underground. She didn't respond right away. Just squinted at me, like she was sizing up a threat, then nodded curtly and disappeared behind her wall. I should have taken that moment more seriously. A few years ago, I might have brushed it off. But people like Karen weren't just nosy, they were bored and entitled and dangerous when given power. And I'd just given her a reason to dig in her manicured claws. Still, I pushed forward. Within a month, the trench was dug. The tank, an NSF-certified polyethylene monster, was dropped into place. I spent my evenings sweating in the dusk, heat sealing the filter chambers, and running pipe beneath my gravel paths. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was mine. When the first rainfall of the season came, I stood out on the patio in bare feet, arms crossed, watching water disappear into the grates I'd set along the concrete slope. I checked the gauges the next morning on 28 gallons captured in a single night. It felt like cheating the system, like catching the sky before it slipped away. Neighbors began to notice the changes. My front yard bloomed with lavender and agave. No sprinkler systems, no wasted water. Just drip lines and strategic mulching. Some people smiled and waved when they walked by. One even asked if I'd help design something similar for his side yard. I felt proud. Useful again. Like my knowledge still meant something after years behind spreadsheets and board meetings. Then, on a Thursday morning in early May, it came a plain white envelope on my doorstep. No return address, just Mesa Ridge CEB in block print. Inside was a violation notice. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have constructed a system that does not meet the community's standards for design aesthetics. All rain collection systems must be pre-approved and non-visible from neighboring properties. Please cease use immediately and submit removal plans within 10 days to avoid daily fines. I read the letter twice, then once more, with shaking hands. It didn't make sense. My system was underground, completely hidden except for the graded entry points, which were flush with the ground and camouflaged with natural stone. The tanks couldn't be seen from the street or even from the side fences. I had followed the HOA rules down to the inch. I pulled out the CC Pluma R packet again, flipping through to the water section. There it was. Section 9.4. Rainwater collection systems are permitted, provided they are not visible from street view and do not detract from the visual integrity of the property. No mention of board approval. No mention of underground systems requiring aesthetics review. I highlighted the section, scanned it, and sent it back in a rebuttal email to the HOA's general contact line. That night, Karen replied, "Mr. Dalton, while we appreciate your dedication to environmental stewardship, the board has decided that your system constitutes a deviation from the uniform aesthetic standards expected in Mesa Ridge. Please comply." No explanation, no citation, just a veiled threat wrapped in condescension. That night, I sat in the garage flipping through old FEMA field manuals and water code annotations. My gut told me something deeper was at play here, some personal crusade disguised as policy enforcement. And if I'd learned anything in the past 20 years, it was this: people who fight logic with power usually collapse when truth comes crashing down. But for now, I still had water and a whole lot of stubbornness left in me. From the moment I first walked the lot, I knew exactly what I wanted to build. To most people, it was just a standard backyard 26 feet wide, sloped ever so slightly to the southeast, ringed by gravel beds and 2 anemic Palo Verde trees that the developer had probably planted as an afterthought. But to me, it was an ecosystem waiting to be restored. Years in drought mitigation had taught me that even the smallest suburban parcel could become self-sufficient if you understood the land. I spent the first week in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just me, a clipboard, and the sun as I walked the yard every hour on the hour. I took temperature readings, soil moisture samples, even surveyed the shadows cast by the surrounding houses. It wasn't overkill. It was muscle memory. Back when I was consulting on drought strategy for Yuma County, we ran simulations like this for entire neighborhoods. Water didn't ask for permission. It moved based on contour gravity and how well you listened. My plan was threefold. 1. Capture every drop that fell on my roof. 2. Filter and store that water in an underground cistern. 3. Redistribute it slowly to native plants via drip irrigation that mimicked natural flows. The city of Mesa had no ordinances banning rainwater harvesting. In fact, Arizona state law encouraged it, especially in areas with long-term drought exposure. I even attended a state-sponsored workshop on it just 2 years prior, where we were told that self-reliance on water is the future. But I knew the HOA wouldn't make it easy. So I designed everything to be invisible. The intake system was disguised as decorative copper grates, flush with the patio and side walkways. I custom fabricated them from old HVAC return vents and powder-coated the surface to prevent rust. Rain would flow into the grates, pass through a layered gravel filter bed beneath, then enter a pre-tank sediment basin. From there, it'd trickle into a buried 3,000-gallon tank I ordered from a supplier near Tucson. The tank itself would sit 9 feet below the surface, encased in reinforced concrete to prevent collapse. Everything was below grade. No tanks, no pipes, no exposed plastic. Just what looked like landscaping. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never know it was there. I hand-dug the trenches myself. It took me 10 days working from sunup to dusk, the dry earth testing every joint in my knees. But I didn't mind. Sweat was part of the process. I reinforced the walls with timber planks as I worked, mindful of collapse. I'd done this before on job sites with 10 times the hazard. I could practically feel my old foreman over my shoulder barking warnings in his New Mexico drawl. Shovel smart, Dalton. Dirt don't care if you've got a pension. Once the trench was ready, I hired a crane operator to lower the tank into place. We did it early one morning before the sun could bake the plastic. As the tank settled into its home, I felt a thrill run through me one I hadn't felt since the early days of fieldwork. The feeling of building something that could outlast me. That might help someone someday long after I was gone. The tank filled quickly during the first 2 storms. I installed a flow meter just upstream of the filter bed and checked it daily. Even with just 3/4 of an inch of rain, I captured nearly 500 gallons. I had full confidence that by mid-season, I'd have enough water to carry my plants through the worst drought Mesa Ridge had seen in years. And I had plants coming, too. Dozens of them. Not the thirsty ornamentals the neighborhood favored, but native species desert marigold, penstemon desert spoon. Plants that thrived on little, but patience and resilience. I even rescued a cluster of prickly pear cactus from a roadside construction site and nursed them back to life. I kept meticulous notes on everything. Dates, volumes, temperatures, plant health. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a living case study. I'd planned to publish an article in one of the urban ecology journals, maybe even give a guest lecture at the university. Not for glory, but because this mattered. People needed to see that sustainability wasn't some distant dream. It was possible here now, one backyard at a time. Then came the curious eyes. First, it was the man across the street, George, I think his name was, who peeked over his fence while pretending to prune his already dead bougainvillea. Then came the whispers, the questions disguised as neighborly concern. What's all that digging for? Is that legal? You putting in a pool or something? I answered each question calmly, confidently. But I could feel it building, the pressure, the unease. Like the neighborhood itself was allergic to individuality. As though doing something different, even if it was smart and responsible, was an act of rebellion. The HOA had a rule book thicker than my engineering thesis. Most of it read like it had been written in 1994 and never updated. Vague language about neighborhood cohesion and visual harmony peppered every page. But nowhere did it say I couldn't harvest rainwater. Just to be safe, I submitted a courtesy notice, not a request, a notice. I scanned my schematics, annotated the landscaping changes, even included an educational pamphlet from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see what I was doing as a benefit. They never responded. 3 weeks passed. The grass in most yards began to brown under the relentless sun. People kept watering out of habit, but the municipal system was already strained. You could hear it in the way the pressure stuttered in the garden hoses. The city issued its first Stage 1 advisory that week, asking residents to reduce outdoor watering by 20%. Voluntary, but firm. My plants thriving. Not because I cheated the system, but because I understood it. Then one day, I came home from picking up irrigation tubing to find Karen Lively standing in my front yard with a clipboard, not on the sidewalk, on my gravel path, right up to the flower bed. I stepped out of my truck and nodded. Afternoon. She didn't smile. Just peered at my plants, scribbled something, then turned toward me. Your gutters, she said. What about them? They're not standard issue for the community. The color is unapproved. I almost laughed. They're bronze. Same shade as every light fixture on the street. They appear darker, she said, still scribbling. And the landscaping, some of these plants aren't on the approved list. Approved by who? The Architectural Committee. Is that a real committee, or just you and your friends? She bristled. We're a volunteer board acting in the best interest of the community. Then I'd suggest writing Arizona House Bill 2830. I said, reaching into my truck for a laminated copy I kept just for situations like this. It guarantees homeowners the right to install water harvesting systems, so long as they're not visible or damaging to neighboring properties. She took the paper like it was covered in mold, scanned it briefly, then handed it back. I'll bring this to the board. I nodded. Good, maybe they'll learn something. She turned on her heel and marched off. That night, I installed a second backup valve to reroute flow underground just in case. It was a precaution I'd taken many times on project sites. You don't always plan for sabotage, but you plan for failure. I wasn't naive. I knew what HOA retaliation looked like. It wasn't fire and brimstone, it was paper cuts, fines, letters, frustration until you gave up. But I wasn't going to give up. Not on this, not again. It came folded, slipped into a manila envelope, and taped to my front door like a threat no one wanted to deliver in person. I saw it the moment I pulled into the driveway. Bold red letters at the top. Notice of HOA violation. Urgent. Not a postcard, not a courtesy call. This was a formal strike. HOA warfare, paper-borne, and smug. I tore it open right there on the porch. The language was clinical, dressed up to sound reasonable. It has come to the attention of the Mesa Ridge Community Enhancement Board that your property is in violation of Section 12.6 of the Architectural and Visual Harmony Standards regarding non-conforming exterior modifications. Specifically, the board has noted unauthorized ground fixtures and structural alterations that compromise aesthetic integrity. It went on to say, I had 10 days to submit a removal plan for the non-compliant rainwater collection apparatus or face, a $7 fine per day, until full compliance was achieved. No photographs, no inspection report, no citation of the actual blueprints I'd submitted, just vague accusations and a ticking financial clock. I stood there for a long time, the envelope in one hand and the letter trembling in the other. I had spent a lifetime engineering solutions to real problems: drought, fire, urban collapse. But now in retirement, I was being punished for doing what I was trained to do, for designing a better system, one that didn't require a single drop from the city's strained water lines. I stormed into the house and pulled up the C+R documents again. I knew them by heart by now, page 46. Paragraph B. Rainwater harvesting systems shall be permitted provided that they are not visible from public view and do not interfere with community infrastructure. That's it. No demand for pre-approval. No clause requiring architectural review. Nothing that matched what they claimed. I scanned the violation letter, highlighted every lie, and attached both documents in an email addressed to the HOA's general contact. Subject: Response to false violation notice. Dear Mesa Ridge HOA Board, I am writing to formally challenge the violation notice dated June 12th. The system in question is a legally compliant underground rainwater harvesting installation designed within the guidelines specified in the Mesa Ridge CC+Rs, as well as Arizona State Statute HB 283D. I demand the notice be withdrawn immediately and my name cleared of any non-compliance. Caleb Dalton. I clicked send. 20 minutes later, I received a terse reply from a woman named Elaine, the HOA's compliance coordinator, who I hadn't heard of before. Dear Mr. Dalton, and thank you for your response. While we acknowledge your intention to adhere to state regulations, HOA governance permits additional aesthetic guidelines in accordance with community standards. The board maintains the authority to enforce said standards. We will discuss your case at the next meeting. I could practically feel the condescension bleeding through the screen. We will discuss your case, as if I were a misbehaving child caught painting outside the lines. I didn't wait. I emailed again, attaching photographs of the invisible system, my construction permits receipts from the trenching company, and the inspection clearance from the city utility office that had verified no water cross-connection existed. They didn't respond. So I printed the entire thread: emails, photos, diagrams, the Bill of Rights for water harvesting, and marched down to the HOA office the next morning. The building sat just past the clubhouse, nestled between the tennis courts and a parking lot that always seemed half empty. The walls were sterile white, the furniture aging from years of board committee meetings, and the woman at the front desk smiled with the weariness of someone who'd been yelled at one too many times. I need to speak to Karen Lively, I said, my binder tucked under my arm. She hesitated. Do you have an appointment? No. But I have documentation, and I won't be leaving without clarification. A few minutes later, Karen emerged from the back hallway, heels clicking like pistols on tile. Her eyes were lined in sharp eyeliner, her smile frozen into the kind of politeness that hides a knife. Mr. Dalton, she said, clasping her hands. I understand there's been some confusion. Confusion, I said, laying the binder down on the table between us. No, Karen. There's documentation, permits, city approvals. There's only one thing missing: an apology. Her expression didn't even flicker. The issue, she said, drawing out the word like it tasted sour, isn't legality. It's harmony, visual unity. Our homeowners rely on a certain standard of appearance to maintain property values. Underground or not, your system alters that perception. How I demanded. You can't see a single piece of it from the road. Even my neighbor admitted he didn't know it existed until you told him. Which is precisely the problem, she snapped. We shouldn't have to worry about hidden infrastructure setting precedent. If we allow you to build underground, others will demand the same. And not all homeowners are as technically inclined. There it was, the mask slipping. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. So your argument, I said slowly, is that I'm too competent. And because someone else might fail to replicate what I built, I should be punished preemptively. Karen's lips tightened. We have guidelines for a reason. I leaned forward. I helped write those guidelines on a state level. I've been on drought advisory committees that your HOA wouldn't even qualify to observe. You don't get to invalidate lawful water conservation because of petty politics. She stood. This will be reviewed at the board meeting next Tuesday. You may attend, but until then, the fines remain active. As I walked out of the building, the heat hit me like a slap to the face. Not the sun, but the realization that I had stepped into something deeper than a misunderstanding. This wasn't about water. This was about ego, about small power clinging to its last stronghold. And unfortunately for them, I had nothing but time and a binder full of receipts. That night, I made 2 calls. First to my old colleague, Susan Herrera, now an advisor at the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Second to the City Code Enforcement Office, where I scheduled a site walk and formal complaint. If the HOA wanted to escalate, so would I. But I'd do it the right way, like I always had. The board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the Mesa Ridge Clubhouse, 7 hours sharp, according to the printed notice that had been taped to every mailbox post like some ceremonial decree. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in clean jeans and a pressed button-down shirt, the same way I used to dress when I testified before state subcommittees. Respectable, calm. A man with nothing to hide and everything documented. The clubhouse smelled like dust and air freshener. Beige folding chairs had been arranged in 2 narrow rows before a plastic table where 5 board members sat, all looking like they took this job far too seriously. Karen Lively sat at the center of course Queen Bee, in a lavender pantsuit flanked by her loyal lieutenants, Brian the landscaping lead, Mary Ann Head of aesthetic oversight, and 2 men whose names I hadn't learned from us because they never spoke in full sentences. The meeting was already in session when I sat down. They were discussing something about repainting the tennis court fence. When they finally called my name, it wasn't with formality. It was with barely disguised annoyance. "Mr. Dalton," Karen said, glancing down at her copy of the agenda. "You've requested time to appeal your recent violation notice regarding unapproved structural modifications to your yard." I stood up, lifting my binder from the chair beside me. "I'm not here to appeal. I'm here to correct a misinterpretation of both HOA guidelines and Arizona state law." Karen gave a tight-lipped smile. "You'll have 5 minutes. I won't need them," I said, flipping open the binder to the first page. "You cited Section 12.6 regarding non-conforming modifications, but as you're aware, or should be, Section 9.4 permits rainwater harvesting systems provided they are not visible and do not interfere with community infrastructure. Mine is entirely underground. No visual impact, no interference." Brian, the landscaping guy, leaned forward. "But what about property values? We've had complaints." "From who?" I asked. "The only people who even know it exists are the ones Karen told." Mary Ann cleared her throat. "It's more about precedent. If we allow one system, soon everyone wants barrels and tanks and hoses." "Then educate them," I said calmly. "This is Arizona. We're heading into our 4th consecutive year of drought. Do you really think preventing people from collecting rain is a long-term strategy?" Karen narrowed her eyes. "You're quoting legality, Mr. Dalton. We're talking about community spirit, about consistency." That's when I opened the next tab in my binder and laid it flat on the table. It was a letter on state letterhead from Susan Herrera, who had overnighted it to me after our call. "To whom it may concern, the rainwater harvesting system installed by Mr. Caleb Dalton complies with all applicable state statutes, including HB 2830, and poses no hazard or visual disturbance to the surrounding community. In fact, it serves as a model of responsible conservation. Attempts to force its removal may be in violation of state homeowner protections." I watched Karen's lips press together so tightly the color drained from them. No one spoke. I continued calmly. "Additionally, I've filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, as well as the city's Code Compliance Office. If the fines are not reversed within 72 hours, I will pursue injunctive relief." Now there was a pause. An actual moment of silence in that sterile room, the kind that only happens when someone realizes they've poked a bear they shouldn't have. Karen recovered first. "Mr. Dalton, this is a community, not a courtroom." "No," I said evenly. "This is a neighborhood. You're a volunteer board, not an enforcement agency. And this," I tapped the letter from Susan, "is the law." Mary Ann shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Brian looked away. The two mute board members finally whispered something to each other but didn't speak up. Karen leaned back, folding her arms. We'll take it under advisement, but no decision will be made tonight. That's fine, I said. I've already made mine. I returned to my seat and remained for the rest of the meeting, though nothing else of note was discussed. Karen barely looked in my direction again, but I noticed the tightness in her jaw every time I turned the page in my binder. When I left the clubhouse that night, several neighbors approached me in the parking lot quietly, cautiously, as if proximity to Karen might summon punishment. That was something one of them said. I didn't know we could push back like that. Most people don't, I replied. That's how they keep you compliant, confusion and fear. Another neighbor, a schoolteacher named Dana, added, It's not just you. They tried to fine us last year for putting up solar lights on the walkway. Said it disrupted nighttime uniformity, whatever that means. I gave her my number. If you ever want help writing a formal letter, let me know. They rely on people not knowing the rules, but I do. That was the beginning, not just of my fight, but of something bigger. Quiet at first. Underground, like my cistern. But growing. By the time I got home that night, I had 2 new emails waiting, both from residents who wanted help installing rainwater systems of their own. And for the first time since I moved into Mesa Ridge, I felt less like a target and more like a spark. 3 days after the meeting, the fines doubled. I found the new notice taped to my mailbox, flapping in the hot wind like a flag of mockery. $150 per day. No formal ruling, no reply to my rebuttal, and no legal justification. Just a number and order and a passive-aggressive note handwritten at the bottom. Failure to comply may result in escalation to lien status. I stood on the curb, the notice crumpling in my fist. Lien status. They were threatening my home. The letter didn't just rattle me. It dug beneath my skin like barbed wire. Not because I feared legal action. I had fought bigger bureaucracies than an HOA. But because I had seen this kind of escalation before. In neighborhoods across drought-ridden counties, I'd watched volunteer boards wield fines like weapons, driving out retirees, single parents, even veterans, people with fewer resources than me. People who eventually gave in, packed up, and left just to make the noise stop. But I wasn't most people. I still had fight left in me. Even so, I had to be strategic. I filed a formal cease and desist against the fine escalation with the city's municipal mediation office. It would take weeks, months, maybe before the case would even be reviewed. In the meantime, my bank would still see those fines as legal debt. If the lien went through, it could affect my credit, my pension disbursements, even my ability to sell the house. I had no choice. So the next morning, under a sun that seemed to judge me, I began dismantling the surface elements of the system. The grates came up first. I unscrewed them slowly, placing them one by one in a wheelbarrow like discarded relics. The copper shone dully, still polished by weeks of summer storms. Then the gravel layer bags and bags of smooth stone I had hand-placed bucket by bucket. I shoveled them up mechanically, sweat pouring down my back, each scrape of metal against stone cutting through me like betrayal. By afternoon, I was down to the access ports. That's when Karen showed up. I heard the crunch of her sandals on the sidewalk before I saw her. She wore a pastel sun hat and sunglasses, as if she were strolling the French Riviera rather than a sun-baked cul-de-sac. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, hands on hips, surveying the scene. "You finally decided to comply," she said flatly. I didn't look up. "No, I decided not to give you the satisfaction of putting a lien on my home." "That's what this is about?" she asked, stepping closer. "Satisfaction." I stood then. Full height, dirty, blistered, furious. This was about water, Karen. About preparing for what every scientist in this state has warned about. What I've warned about. "But you made it about ego." Her lips curled. "It's not ego to want order." "No, it's ego to punish someone for outsmarting you." She flinched, just slightly, but it was enough. "I hope you're proud," I added. "You killed a working conservation system during a drought." She turned without answering and walked away. I continued dismantling in silence. By dusk, my back ached, and my knees felt like sandpaper, but I had covered the trench and patched the landscaping as best I could. From the street, it looked as if nothing had ever been there, just another yard with decorative gravel and a dying Palo Verde. A facade. Just how the HOA liked it. I sat on the porch that night, staring at the sky. It was cloudy. pregnant with the promise of rain that I could no longer catch. I'd gone from storing life to dumping it down the storm drain, all because of a rule that didn't exist. A knock came at the door around 9:30. I opened it to find Dana, the schoolteacher neighbor, holding a tray of lemon bars. I heard she said softly, "What they made you do?" I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the kitchen under soft light, the smell of citrus and concrete still clinging to me. She didn't say much, just listened. And after I finished explaining everything from the design to the permit to the fine escalation, she looked at me with a fire I hadn't seen in her before. "They can't keep doing this," she said. "You're the third neighbor in a year they've pushed into undoing something good. Most people just don't have the time to fight. Then maybe we fight together." The next morning, she posted anonymously on the neighborhood's internal message board. HOA forced a resident to dismantle a legal rainwater system during a drought. Anyone else tired of this? Within hours, the thread exploded. People came forward. Stories poured in like rain that had been waiting to fall. A young couple fined for putting up a small greenhouse. A senior citizen who had to remove his front yard bench because it wasn't architecturally consistent. A veteran whose American flag placement was deemed too visible. The stories weren't just complaints, they were evidence of a pattern. Abuse masked as governance. Arbitrary decisions dressed in the language of visual cohesion. And people were done. That weekend, a group of 12 neighbors met in my garage. We called ourselves the water table, a joke, yes, but also a statement. We printed out CC+R copies, highlighted inconsistencies, made spreadsheets. Dana created a community survey. George, from across the street, volunteered to talk to a local journalist. Someone else suggested starting a petition to recall board members. I watched all of it from my workbench, quietly amazed. I hadn't asked for any of this. I had just wanted to catch rain. But in trying to stop me, Karen had awakened something much larger than my cistern. She had awakened a neighborhood that no longer trusted the people in charge. And they were thirsty for water, for fairness, for change. Still, the system was gone. And in a cruel twist of irony, it rained that night. A soft soaking drizzle that would have filled my tanks by 30%. I stood by the patio door and watched it run off into the gutter, wasted. But not for long, because while the pipes were gone, the knowledge remained. And I was just getting started. The sky shut like a slammed door. After that gentle, mocking drizzle, the night I dismantled my system, not a single drop of rain fell for the next 47 days. Not a mist, not a cloud. The monsoon season passed us over entirely, like a train that didn't bother stopping at our station. At first, people didn't notice. They kept running their sprinklers at dawn, sipping iced tea on porches, waving politely, while their water meters spun like roulette wheels. But I watched the signs, the way the soil crusted faster each morning, the brittleness of the ornamental trees lining the HOA's main roundabout, the distant shimmer of heat warping the horizon at 800 a.m. Then, the city issued its first mandatory Stage 2 water alert. The letter came printed on glossy cardstock with bold red lettering across the top. Conservation required, effective immediately. Outdoor watering was now restricted to 2 days per week. Pools could not be refilled. Fountains and decorative ponds had to be shut off. Violators would be fined. I stood at my kitchen window and watched Karen Lively's prized backyard waterfall get turned off like a guilty secret. Without it, her entire landscape seemed duller, smaller. By the third week, the HOA's greenbelts, meticulously mowed and chemically pampered, began to wither. Brown patches formed like scars across the soft Bermuda grass. The gardening crew tried to save them, sneaking in pre-dawn irrigation sessions, but someone reported it. The city fined the HOA $1,200. The tension began to simmer. Suddenly, the same neighbors who once rolled their eyes at my rainwater system were stopping me on the sidewalk. "How did you build that tank again? Was it expensive? Think the city would let me do one now?" I answered every question, patiently, even the condescending ones. I wasn't here for vindication, I was here for function. I wanted my neighborhood to survive. I wanted them to understand the water wasn't coming back anytime soon. Then the whispers started. Someone mentioned that Mesa Ridge had used more water per household than any other neighborhood in our zip code. Someone else said the HOA was planning to ask the city for a conservation exemption to keep the greenbelts alive, while everyone else cut back. Dana forwarded me a screenshot of an internal HOA email chain she'd gotten access to thanks to a sympathetic friend of hers who worked in the board's IT support. The email from Karen read, "We need to maintain visual standards at all costs. Dry lawns create panic. If that means pushing for priority status or shifting blame to non-compliant homeowners, so be it." That was the final crack. By the fourth week, the city began rolling out targeted inspections. Code enforcement vehicles cruised slowly down our streets, checking irrigation systems and issuing citations for runoff. Tempers flared. One neighbor, Dave McCullough, was caught arguing with a city inspector and threatened to sue. Another was fined $300 for watering on the wrong day. She cried on her porch while her hibiscus wilted. Meanwhile, inside my house, my shower pressure had dropped by 40%. Even the air conditioning groaned, sucking air through filters dry as bone. And still not a cloud. Then, on the morning of day 48, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my breath catch. FEMA declares Mesa County a water-stressed emergency zone. Shores. I stared at the headline. Federal Emergency Management Agency classifies Mesa Ridge area under Stage 3. Resource scarcity. Eligible for immediate relief operations. Within 2 hours, FEMA trucks arrived. White panel vans with blue letters escorted by local deputies began setting up hydration stations at the community park. The playground was cordoned off. Giant signs warned of Stage 3 restrictions, no exterior water use, mandatory water rationing, no hose or sprinkler use, emergency-only landscaping. The HOA board didn't say a word. Karen vanished. Her name disappeared from the HOA website overnight. Officially, she was on leave due to family illness. Unofficially, everyone knew she'd gone underground. Her lush lawn, the crown jewel of the cul-de-sac, turned brittle within a week. The sound of her koi pond evaporating in the sun was the most poetic thing I'd heard in years. But the panic spread faster than the drought. Grocery store shelves emptied. Bottled water flew off the racks. Rumors of ration cards swirled on Nextdoor. People hoarded gallon jugs like wartime families stockpiling canned goods. And then the questions started again, more urgent this time. Less curious, more desperate. You had water, didn't you? Before they made you take it down. Could you build another one? The same neighbors who once voted with silence now stood on my front porch with pleading eyes and sunburned shoulders. I wanted to be angry. I had every right. But something about their expressions, earnest, scared, humbled, brought me back to the core of who I was. I wasn't here to win a pissing match. I was here to protect people from the very crisis I'd spent a lifetime studying. So I led them to my garage. Behind a row of tool cabinets, I pulled away a rolling shelf and revealed the steel-reinforced trapdoor that Karen never knew existed. I knelt, lifted it, and descended into the crawl space, where I had built a second, unregistered, smaller cistern. Hidden beneath the slab during original renovations. I'd built it as backup. Insurance. Not out of paranoia, but because engineers like me never leave one point of failure. Not when you know what's coming. I can ration this, I told them, if you really need it, but only for drinking and sanitation. No yards, no vanity. They nodded solemnly. That night, I filled 27 jugs and distributed them, one per household. Word spread. Within days, people stopped watering altogether. Some neighbors dug tiny trenches in their yards to redirect gray water. Others set up basic tarp catchments. Dana and I held an impromptu workshop on the HOA basketball court, showing people how to filter rooftop runoff through coffee filters and charcoal. We weren't breaking the law, we were adapting to reality. The media caught on. A local news station aired a story titled, "HOA fined resident for water system, now the neighborhood depends on him." I didn't want to go on camera, but I did, because I had to say it. The HOA prioritized lawn color over human needs, and now we all suffer. But this community can still fix itself if we stop listening to people obsessed with aesthetics and start listening to the land. The clip went viral. The next day, I got a call from Susan at the State Water Department. I saw the segment, she said. "You should be on the governor's drought task force." I'm serious. I'm just trying to keep my neighbors from drying out, and you're doing a better job than most counties. By the end of the week, the city rescinded Mesa Ridge's landscaping exemptions and placed the HOA under formal review. They froze HOA enforcement rights during the crisis. Fines stopped. So did inspections. But the damage was already done. Karen didn't return. Her property was eventually listed for sale, the grass dead, the flower beds dust. The rest of us, we were learning how to live like the desert taught us resourcefully, quietly, and with reverence. And somewhere beneath my feet, the tank still waited, not just filled with water, but with proof. Proof that even when they strip away what you've built, they can't erase what you've learned. The FEMA trucks had been in the neighborhood for 6 days, when the panic finally turned into paperwork. On the 7th morning, Mesa Ridge officially received its classification, Zone B Resource Crisis, Urban, Suburban Level 3. That meant our water infrastructure was no longer considered stable. It meant every household was now under mandatory rationing, 15 gallons per person per day, for everything drinking, bathing, cooking, toilets. And it meant that the HOA no longer had jurisdiction over individual water decisions. I read the declaration 3 times before the reality settled in. FEMA's seal was stamped on every page, and the signature at the bottom came from the regional administrator out of Denver. Mesa Ridge, the neighborhood that fined me for collecting rain, was now listed in a federal emergency database under the same category as post-hurricane subdivisions and wildfire-displaced mobile home parks. I sat back in my chair, hands folded over my stomach, and let out a slow breath. I hadn't been hoping for this. I hadn't wished for suffering just to be proven right, but I couldn't ignore the bitter irony of it. Outside, the street was quiet, eerily so. The lawns were gone, replaced by patches of tan dirt and crunchy thatch. Trees stood like skeletons. You could smell the dryness. Even the birds had stopped singing. That afternoon, FEMA set up a mobile command post at the edge of the neighborhood park, the same park where HOA once hosted wine tastings and movie nights under the stars. Now it was filled with tan tents, water tanks, solar showers, and volunteers in reflective vests handing out purification tablets and gallon jugs. I walked down with Dana and George, both carrying collapsible containers. No one spoke much. You could feel the shame in the air, how months ago this would have been inconceivable. When we reached the FEMA tent, a young woman in a navy shirt with a notepad asked for our names and addresses. When I told her mine, she looked up. "You're Caleb Dalton." "Yes." She paused, then smiled slightly. "We've been briefed on your design." I blinked. "My what?" "Your rain capture system. Word got around after the segment on Channel 9. Our technical team's very interested in how you modeled retention without visible structures." Why, I asked, honestly baffled. Because most neighborhoods didn't do that. You're one of the only people we've seen with a functional plan who got shut down and then still helped others. Behind her, a man in a dusty baseball cap waved at me. "Dalton, right?" he called out. "Mind sticking around after you fill up? Our lead engineer wants to talk to you." Dana nudged my shoulder. "I think you just got recruited." By sunset, I was sitting under a tarp with 2 FEMA coordinators sketching on a whiteboard how my underground system had been laid out, how overflow was redirected to subsurface irrigation, how the trapdoor panel in my garage concealed the backup tank. "You did this without city funding," one of them asked. "I did it with a shovel and some conviction." They both laughed. And then one of them said, "Would you be willing to help us implement something similar on a pilot basis? We're starting retrofits next month in subdivisions like this across the county." I sat there stunned for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," I said. "If it means more people get to keep their dignity, I'm in." Back in the neighborhood, things shifted quickly. The HOA board, once so confident in their aesthetic mandates, had gone silent. Karen was still gone, her house, sitting like a dried-out carcass, for sale signs staked in a bed of dirt. Marianne had resigned in an email citing health concerns. Brian stopped responding to resident messages. The board, once loud with rules, became a vacuum. The water table, our informal resistance group, took over in the silence. We used the neighborhood's private message board to coordinate jug pickups, distribute graywater guides, and host workshops on home conservation systems. I became the default point of contact for any technical questions. And then, about 10 days after FEMA's declaration, something happened that none of us expected. Karen came back. Her SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac late on a Tuesday afternoon. She stepped out wearing sunglasses, her hair, unkempt shoulders visibly hunched. Her front yard had become a wasteland. The lush garden that once drew HOA newsletter praise now looked like scorched earth. She didn't knock on anyone's door. But the next morning, I found her standing at the edge of my driveway. I was replacing a filter on a makeshift solar still when I looked up and saw her arms at her sides. No clipboard, no superiority. Just tired. "I was wrong," she said quietly. The words caught me off guard. Not because I didn't think she was capable of saying them, but because I never expected to hear them without a legal summons involved. "I was wrong to fight you," she repeated. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. But I was just keeping things comfortable for people like me." I set the filter aside and walked to the edge of the drive. "You caused a lot of damage," I said, my voice even. "You tried to break people's trust in each other. You fined us, humiliated us." "I know," she whispered. Then after a long pause, "Would you let me help somehow?" I stared at her. And for a moment I saw not the woman who'd once tried to strangle my future with fine print, but a woman who had been raised in a system that made her think order meant goodness. That sameness meant safety. She was breaking not from thirst, but from recognition. I nodded once. "You can start by digging," I said. "We're retrofitting George's yard. He's got a shallow grade and good runoff potential." Karen blinked. "You want me to dig?" I handed her a shovel. "If you want redemption, it starts in the dirt." She took it. No speech, no flair, just quiet and a long exhale. That evening, 20 of us gathered in the park now dubbed the People's Plaza to hold a town forum under the FEMA shade tent. We discussed permanent changes, bylaws, water independence, emergency readiness. I proposed a new neighborhood committee focused on sustainable infrastructure. We called it the Mesa Ridge Renewal Council. And the first vote we took was unanimous. No future HOA board would ever have the authority to restrict legal water harvesting. Then we cheered, not just because we had won, but because we had survived, together. For the first time in months, someone passed around lemonade made from rain-caught water. It tasted like more than citrus. It tasted like dignity. I thought I'd be angry when they came knocking. After all the threats, fines and quiet humiliations, the sneers, the meetings where I was treated like a problem instead of a neighbor, I expected to feel some measure of vindication. I imagined myself turning them away with the same indifference they had shown me. A slow closing of the door. No words, just silence. But that's not how it happened. It started with a knock. Not from Karen, not from a board member, but from Mary Ann, the one who used to chair the so-called Aesthetic Oversight Committee. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her blouse was damp with sweat at the collar. She held a jug of water in one hand and a crumpled paper towel in the other. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, not even trying to smile. "But I'm here because I don't know where else to go." She didn't have to explain. I stepped back and let her in. My house had become a strange kind of shelter cooler than most, thanks to the thermal buffering I'd designed into the structure. The shades were drawn, the ceiling fans rotated on low, and the air smelled faintly of sage and lemon from the filtered gray water I used to clean the floors. I sat her down at the kitchen table and handed her a glass of water. She stared at it for a long time before taking a sip. Her eyes fluttered closed. "It's clean," she whispered. "So clean." I nodded. "Filtered 3 times gravel UV, then carbon." She looked at me like I'd offered her a miracle. "I had no idea you'd kept part of it going after they made you tear it down." "I didn't rebuild it," I said. "I just never stopped protecting the backup. I knew what was coming." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. We were wrong. I was wrong. We let Karen control everything because she was loud and confident, and we were all afraid to be the one who opposed her." "I know," I said, "but silence has consequences." She nodded slowly. By nightfall, 5 more neighbors came by, each one with a different reason, the same request. "Yeah, do you still have water?" "Yes, can you help me build something?" "What can I volunteer?" It didn't take long for word to spread that my backup system was intact. I didn't advertise it. I didn't boast, but people knew. And unlike before, when questions came with a tone of judgment, this time they came with humility. George, who once called my gravel paths off-putting, arrived with his teenage son and offered to dig trenches. Dana printed flyers for a new community sustainability task force. Even Brian, the former landscaping head, brought over a bag of PVC connectors and offered to help with piping. And then on the 3rd day, Karen returned. Again. This time not as a humbled neighbor or desperate visitor, but as a woman who had done the one thing I never expected. She read everything. She showed up holding a binder mine. or rather a duplicate she had built using scans from the public library printer. Inside were all my original schematics, legal citations, FEMA advisories, and the annotated CC+R pages I had once brought to the meeting where she tried to silence me. I read it all she said, every page, twice. I crossed my arms, and I'm not here to apologize. You've already heard that. I raised an eyebrow. She continued, I'm here because I want to help rebuild. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a job. I couldn't help but chuckle. A job. You need someone who knows how the HOA works. Someone who can dismantle what we built from the side. I can get into the document archives, rewrite the enforcement priorities, propose amendments. She looked me in the eye. Let me fix what I broke. And just like that, the past shattered a little more. Not into pieces of regret, but into bricks. Useful, weighty, and real. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded. That's more than I deserve. That week, we launched the Mesa Ridge Water Recovery Project. It wasn't fancy. No government funding. No flashy banners. Just tools, sweat, and a team of neighbors who were finally done pretending the HOA had their best interests in mind. We started with George's yard, then Dana's, then a newly widowed woman named Ellen who lived on the far corner lot. We laid gravel trenches, taught people how to set up drip tubing, and installed recycled 300-gallon food-safe tanks that a local distributor donated after watching our story on the news. I reprinted my blueprints and added beginner notes, how to test grade slopes using a marble and a board, how to calculate roof runoff during a 1-inch storm, design a native plant layout. We made laminated guides, gave out free training, and held evening Q&As in my garage. Then something remarkable happened. People from other neighborhoods started showing up. First, a couple from the next subdivision over, then a man from 6 miles south. They all came with the same story. Their HOAs had blocked rain systems too, and now they were desperate. So we gave them tools, knowledge, dignity, and for once, we gave them water. On the 7th day of the project, I walked outside just before dawn and looked up. The sky was cloudless, but not empty. It shimmered faintly, a kind of pre-dawn glow that desert dwellers know intimately. The hour when the land breathes before the heat returns. The hour when silence isn't absence, it's reverence. And in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in months. Oh! It wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. But it was everywhere, carried in the laughter of a neighbor, running hose from a new collection barrel. In the dusty handshake of two men who'd once argued over hedge height. In the slow nod Karen gave me as she walked past, arms full of filter mesh and gravel. Later that morning, FEMA's regional coordinator returned. She pulled me aside and said, "We've had our eyes on Mesa Ridge. We think this model, what you've started here, could change how suburban communities handle climate pressure." I looked around. At the sweat, the calloused hands, the rows of homemade filters sitting like battle flags. "It's not just me," I said. "It's them. They just needed someone to show them they had the right." She smiled. "Then you've done more than most engineers ever do." I didn't answer. I just reached for another length of pipe and went back to work. Because the truth is, I didn't do this for redemption, or pride, or headlines. I did it because I knew the rain would return one day, and this time, we'd be ready. By the second month of the drought, the FEMA tents were a fixture in the neighborhood, just like the cacti, just like the cracks in the earth. They stood there under the cloudless sky, dispensing water and dignity in equal measure. But behind the scenes, I was working on something else, something bigger. I still had my binder, of course, the original one, the one Karen had tried to suppress and then copied. I kept it pristine, every page protected in a plastic sleeve, every annotation highlighted in yellow and red. But now, beside that binder, I had something new, a formal legal complaint against the Mesa Ridge Community Enhancement Board. It wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. You see, when they forced me to dismantle my system, they violated not just Arizona HB 2830, but also state homeowner protection statutes, specifically those barring HOAs from imposing restrictions that conflict with municipal code during emergencies. I had the documentation. I had timestamps, and most importantly, I had witnesses. I compiled a full timeline with receipts, violation notices, city records, emails from board members, even copies of the initial designs stamped with city approval. Dana helped organize a spreadsheet detailing similar incidents from other residents. George scanned in pages from his own citation file. We were building a case, not just against a board, but against a culture of unchecked pettiness that had nearly dried out a whole community. And just when I thought we'd have to wait weeks for traction, a lawyer contacted me. Her name was Camilla Vance, a partner at a sustainability-focused legal firm downtown. She had seen the news segment, then read the FEMA report, and finally pulled the HOA's publicly filed documents. They never had the authority to enforce those fines, she said matter-of-factly. Their own bylaws contradict their actions. She offered to represent us pro bono. We formed a quad coalition of 15 residents and filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA activity statewide. Then, with Camilla's help, we added a civil suit for damages limited, symbolic, but powerful. We weren't just asking for a reversal of fines. We were demanding policy reform. Word spread fast. News outlets picked it up. Residents sue HOA over water rights during drought. A local radio host read a section from my binder aloud on air. Even the city council issued a statement. The Mesa Ridge incident demonstrates the urgent need for reform in HOA enforcement power during environmental emergencies. Within 2 weeks, the AHOA board was suspended, pending review. Karen formally resigned. No letter this time, just a statement through a third-party attorney citing unmanageable public pressure. Mary Ann quietly withdrew her name from all HOA records. Brian posted a cryptic message online about stepping back to focus on his business, and that was that. With the board dissolved, the HOA fell under receivership, meaning the city appointed a temporary manager, a neutral party who would oversee compliance with state law and FEMA policy until new elections could be held. And that's when the audit began. Turns out Mesa Ridge HOA had collected nearly $94,000 in improper fines over the last 2 years. Most of it under vague violations like non-harmonious landscaping and structural distractions. None of it was real law. It was policy dressed in performance. And people paid it because they didn't know they could say no. But now they did. Residents were issued refunds. Lien threats were rescinded. And I got an official letter of apology from the city itself. I didn't frame it. I filed it in the back of my binder, right between the email where Karen told me to comply and the FEMA declaration that proved her wrong. Legally, the board was done. But emotionally, socially, there was still healing to do. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the board's suspension, I hosted a community meeting at the park. Not a protest, not a lecture. Just a circle of folding chairs, pitchers of lemon water, and a whiteboard where I wrote, "What do we want next?" I expected 5 people. 30 showed up. We talked about the future not just of water, but of governance, of kindness, of knowing your neighbors beyond what their lawn looks like. Someone suggested creating a values statement for Mesa Ridge, something that would guide decisions without relying on power structures that had proven so fragile. Someone else asked me to run for the new board. I shook my head. I didn't fight this to take control. I fought it so no one would have to again. Instead, I offered to chair a sustainability advisory committee, an informal group that would educate, support, and empower homeowners. Not dictate, just guide. And everyone agreed. Even Karen. Yes, she came. She sat quietly in the back at first, hands folded, a little pale. But when I opened the floor for anyone who wanted to speak, she stood. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "And I don't deserve leadership, but I'd like to help. Even if it's just handing out tools or sorting donations." No one clapped, no one jeered, we just listened. And I nodded. Later that night, I walked the edge of my property with a flashlight checking moisture levels, looking for signs of runoff. I had rebuilt the system, not identical, but smarter, more resilient. It was legal now, unquestionably. And people knew what it looked like, how it worked, and why it mattered. In the dark, I heard soft voices next door, George teaching his son how to adjust a drip timer. Across the street, someone filled buckets from a freshly installed barrel. Life was still hard. The drought hadn't ended. The FEMA trucks hadn't packed up. But something had shifted in the ground beneath us. It wasn't water, it was ownership. Not of property, but of responsibility. And this time, no board could take it away. I looked up at the stars, clear and sharp against the black sky. The same sky that had once refused us rain now stood above a neighborhood finally unafraid to claim its right to prepare for it. And as I turned back toward the house, I knew we hadn't just won a case. We had rewritten the rules. It's been 6 months since the water crisis hit Mesa Ridge. The FEMA trucks are gone now, their tire tracks long faded from the park lawn. The tents have been packed up, the ration signs taken down, And the silence that used to signal fear now signals something else entirely. Recovery. We didn't go back to how things were. We moved forward on purpose. You wouldn't recognize the neighborhood if you'd seen it back when Karen ruled from her front porch with a clipboard. The manicured lawns, the identical mailboxes, the HOA-mandated color schemes, they're still here in places, but they no longer define us. What defines us now are the blue rain barrels that peek out from side yards, the mulch paths dug to redirect stormwater, the solar dryers strung with clothespins between salvaged desert mesquite posts, and the people who once whispered complaints now laugh together while rerouting gray water through shared channels. People who once resented my gravel beds now ask if I'll teach their kids how to measure slope with a level and a marble. People who once voted in silence now raise their hands with confidence. And somehow, without intending to, I became the person they turn to. Not just for advice or measurements, but for leadership. I tried to resist it. For a while, I insisted I was just a retired engineer with a chip on his shoulder and too many notebooks. But the truth is, this community made me feel something I hadn't felt since my last government field deployment: purpose. After the lawsuit settled and the refunds rolled out, we held our first true election open to all residents, paper ballots, no email proxies. For the first time, every homeowner had a voice. And when the results were read aloud in the park, I found myself voted in unanimously as a chair of the Sustainability Council, a position we had written into the bylaws ourselves. Not HOA president, not code enforcer. Guide. The first thing I did was draft a new neighborhood charter co-written with Dana and reviewed by Camilla. It included 3 foundational principles. 1. Water is a community right, not a privilege of appearance. 2. Homeowners shall never be fined or penalized for implementing conservation systems compliant with state law. 3. All governance must prioritize resilience, transparency, and human dignity. It passed with 89% approval. And just like that, the HOA that once tried to fine me into silence now displayed my schematic drawings on bulletin boards and printed excerpts from my binder in the monthly newsletter. Karen, she's still here. She never ran for re-election, but she attends every meeting. She volunteers quietly and without fanfare. She coordinates mulch deliveries and helps senior residents clean their filters. We don't talk much, but sometimes our eyes meet during community events, and there's no bitterness left between us. Only acknowledgement. Like 2 soldiers from opposing armies who now plant trees side by side in the same battered field. One afternoon in early spring, after the first real rain in months, she came to my house with a bag of seed balls made from clay and native flower seeds. She left them on the porch with a note that simply read, "For the runoff paths, so beauty grows with the function." I planted them the next day. The kids in the neighborhood call me the water guy. I don't mind. They follow me around on their bikes, asking questions about catchment systems and filtration. I give them little assignments: measure your driveway's slope, calculate how many gallons fall on your roof during a 1-inch storm, design a native plant layout. Some of them built their own miniature rain gardens in their backyards. One of them even gave a presentation at school about how their house now uses 40% less water than last year. Their teacher emailed me and asked if I'd come speak. So I did. I stood in front of a classroom full of 10-year-olds and told them the story of a neighborhood that tried to ban rain and how it learned to listen to the earth instead. When I was finished, one boy raised his hand and asked, "Why did they try to stop you if you were helping?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Sometimes people confuse sameness with safety. They think if everything looks the same, nothing will go wrong. But nature isn't like that. And neither are people." He nodded very seriously. "Do you think we'll ever run out of water again?" I looked out the window at the clear sky, then back at him. "Not if you're in charge." A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at the U.S. State Drought Resilience Summit in Phoenix. They asked me to give a keynote about grassroots community adaptation. I stood behind the podium in a clean shirt and worn boots, looking out over a crowd of municipal leaders, nonprofit directors, engineers, and educators. And I told them about Mesa Ridge. Not about the lawsuits, not about the fines, but about the mornings when we shared water between neighbors. About the strangers who became collaborators. About the woman who once punished us with bylaws and now delivered gravel with her own hands. And when I was done, I left them with this: we didn't fix everything, We didn't solve the drought. But we learned that control is not the same thing as care, and that leadership doesn't come from a title. It comes from knowing what's right and doing it anyway. Even when they fine you, they stood and applauded. I didn't stay for this gala afterward. I drove home under the stars, my truck rattling over the asphalt, the scent of creosote in the air after a brief afternoon storm. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw something glistening along the edge of the yard, tiny green sprouts pushing up where the seed balls had landed weeks earlier. They weren't fancy flowers, no roses or daffodils, just humble desert blooms, resilient, honest, exactly what we needed. I sat on the porch for a long time listening to the soft hum of wind against stone, the quiet shifting of a neighborhood that had once tried to bury me and had instead built something better on the foundation I refused to surrender. From outcast to council chair, from non-compliant to mentor, from hoarder of water to sharer of knowledge. I didn't win by fighting. I won by staying, by outlasting them, yes, but also by outloving them. Because when the drought hit and the rules collapsed and the board lost its teeth, what mattered wasn't whose yard was green. What mattered was who had the courage to say, "Well, this isn't right, and I know a better way." And then show them, one pipe, one barrel, one neighbor at a time.